Welcome to my channel. 2014 MV Sewol. A big thank you to the viewer who suggested this content. The MV Sewol was an 18-year-old ship and was very dilapidated. The ship would make around 3 trips each week from Incheon to Jeju. The trip took around 13.5 hours to complete. It was a normal routine trip for the ship, but on April 15, 2014, this was about to change. On that day, the MV Sewol was due to leave port at 6:30 p.m., but fog was covering the area, and a low visibility warning was issued. This held up the ship's departure, and it would not depart until around 9 p.m. that evening. It is reported that this was the only ship to have left port on that evening. The MV Sewol was believed to have been carrying around 443 passengers and 33 crew members on board on this particular evening. Along with this, she was carrying cargo in around 185 cars. Also among the passengers were 325 students who were on a field trip from Danwon High School. Little did anyone know of the impending disaster that would strike that night. The captain of the MV Sewol on this trip was Lee Junseok. He had been a replacement captain at the time, but did have over 40 years' experience at sea. Unbeknown to those on board the ship, the tons of cargo had not been properly secured. It was also found that the previous captain had requested a repair to a faulty steering gear, but it hadn't been repaired before the MV Sewol departed that evening. Nothing had been done about the faulty steering. It was at around 7:30 a.m. on the April 16 that the third mate took over the watch. The ship was around 2 to 3 miles from the Maenggol Channel at around 8:20 that morning. The third mate instructed the helmsman to change the steering system from autopilot to manual. The visibility was good at the time and it seemed as if everything was going according to plan. However, the Maenggol Channel was known for having strong underwater currents, and extra caution was needed when steering the ship through this. This was nothing new, as the MV Sewol was following the route it usually took, and those on watch would have known that extra caution was needed. At the time, breakfast was being served in the cafeteria, and all those on board were blissfully unaware of the impending disaster to come. Third mate, Park Han-kyul and helmsman Cho Jun-ki were both in the wheelhouse at the time, with the captain still absent. It was around 8:45 that Park instructed Cho to change course slightly, and this was done. Another order was given a while later to change course from 140 degrees to 145 degrees. It wasn't long after this that Park claims the ship began listing to the starboard side and she gave another order for Cho to turn the wheel to port. She then claims she heard Cho say the wheel wasn't working. However, Cho went on to claim that the listing of the ship began on the first order to change course slightly. Both claim the listing began at a different time. It is believed that there could have been confusion inside the wheelhouse at the time as the ship began listing and the accounts of what happened could be muddled. Unbeknown to Park and Cho, when the turn was made, due to the overloading of cargo aboard the ship, and the cargo being improperly secured, the cargo fell to one side of the ship, causing it to list. It was at this time that passengers claimed to have heard a loud bang. Due to the cargo falling to one side, water came in through the side door of the cargo loading bay. It was now that the ship was in real trouble and there was no way back from here. It is reported that Captain Lee quickly returned to the bridge after feeling the ship listing. Cho stopped the engines and ordered the evacuation of the engine room. The ship now began to drift. It is unclear on whose order it was to stop the engines. It was now clear that the ship was in trouble and was beginning to sink. However, passengers on board were ordered to stay where they were, even when water was coming into the passenger compartments. No order was given to evacuate the ship, and a lot of the passengers stayed where they were. It remains unclear why this order was given, especially after the captain knew by this time there was no way the ship was going to be all right. It was discovered that passengers were told to stay where they were, but the captain decided to leave the ship, leaving all those on board to fend for themselves. It was discovered afterwards that the first emergency call had been made by one of the students on board the ship. Following this, the Mokpo Coast Guard ordered a patrol vessel to go to the scene. Sadly, the student, Choi Duk-ha, who had made the call, did not survive the sinking, and his body was amongst one of those to be recovered. It wasn't until 9:23 that the passengers were then ordered to put on life jackets, but still no evacuation order was given. The evacuation order would be given out at 9:30, but it is believed that this was for the crew and not the passengers. It is believed that around 160 passengers and some crew members decided by this time to jump overboard, trying to save themselves. The MV Sewol would take 2.5 hours to finally sink. It is believed that a lot of passengers did what the captain had ordered and stayed where they were, most likely believing they would be rescued. By 2:42 p.m., 150 Special Forces personnel from ROK Army Special Warfare Command, along with 40 divers, were sent to the scene. By April 17, the search began for the missing passengers. It was now clear that those left on board were either in an air pocket, or deceased. It was on April 18 that the Coast Guard pumped air into any possible air pockets, trying to keep anyone still inside alive. Divers would enter the ship's hull, but could only get to the cargo deck. Sadly, one of the rescuers and 2 divers died also in the rescue attempt. A helicopter returning from the rescue crashed near to an apartment complex, killing all those on board, and injuring a high school student. The government announced that it had approved the salvage of the wreckage, in hope that they could find out what had happened that day, and to recover anyone still left aboard the ship. An investigation got underway as to what had caused the sinking. It was concluded that the sudden turn had caused the cargo to shift to port, causing the ship to become unstable and leading to the listing, which would have been unrecoverable by the crew. It was also concluded that overloading of cargo and the cargo being improperly secured had also been a factor in the sinking. Captain Lee Jun-sok was arrested on suspicion of negligence of duty, violation of maritime law and other infringements. The captain had chosen to abandon the ship while passengers were still on board. The South Korea law indicates that the captain of a ship must remain on board during a disaster. The helmsman and third mate were also arrested on suspicion of negligence and manslaughter. 12 further arrests were also made, with the whole crew held responsible. It was on May 15 that Captain Lee, First Mate Kong Won-sik, Second Mate, Kim Young-ho and Chief Engineer Park Ji-ho were indicted on charges of homicide through gross negligence, which carried a potential death penalty. 11 other crew members faced lesser charges of abandoning the ship and safety offences. However, it was found that 3 crew members were amongst those to stay on board the ship to help passengers escape. Sadly, these 3 crew members would go down with the ship, but surviving passengers who they had helped, commended them for their courage. Kong Hee-jin Marine, who were the ship's operator, was also charged with causing death by negligence, and it would be in May 2014, that Kong Hee-jin Marine had its license revoked to operate ferries on that route. It was in November 2014 that Captain Lee was found guilty of negligence and sentenced to 36 years in prison. Park Ji-ho was also found guilty of murder and jailed for 30 years. 13 other crew members were also given jail sentences of up to 20 years. However, Captain Lee was later found guilty of murder and had his sentence increased to life. Other crew members, however, would see their sentences reduced, including that of Chief Engineer Park Ji-ho, whose murder conviction was overturned, much to the disgust of the victims' relatives. It wasn't until 2017 that the wreckage of the MV Sewol was finally raised. The remains of Cho Eun-hwa of Danton High School and passenger Lee Young-suk were finally discovered and identified. It had been a long time coming for the family of these victims. Sadly, this disaster cost the lives of 299 people, including those of students from Danwon High School. This is a disaster that could have easily been avoided. We will never really know how many more lives could have been saved if the order to evacuate the ship was given sooner. For the victims' relatives, this is something they have to live with every day. The reasons why the captain and crew members did not give the order to evacuate the ship, or why they did not remain on board the ship to help passengers, remains unclear. Our hearts go out to the victims' relatives, and to those who survived this disaster. May you never be forgotten. We would like to hope that this was a one-off incident, but sadly, these types of disasters carry on happening even today. For those who are watching this, stay safe. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my channel to view other content.